I don't know what you guys do for fun on your spare time after work on a Friday night, but I hang out at a bicycle shop and film videos so that you can understand specs and details of any given mountain bike. My name's Graham. I'm the owner of Bike Bros, a bicycle shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada. And in today's video, we're having a look at the brand new 2025 Giant Talon 4. This is the first of 3 different price point Giant Talons. This Talon 4 is a 620 USD bike, or in Canada, 749. There is also a Talon 2 at 750 US dollars, a Talon 1 at 950 US dollars. So in today's video, we're going to be going over all the details of this bike so you can understand if this is a good bike for you to choose. And I think by the end, you will probably realize that this might be the best use of 620 bucks US or 750 bucks Canadian you could possibly imagine in the current bicycle market. So as mentioned, this new Talon 4 is the first of 3 different price points. This is one of 2 different colors that the Talon 4 is available in. This is a black color, and it does have a little bit of a two-tone sort of a thing going on, if you see on the down tube there. The other color available on this bike is a bright orange color. This bike that we're looking at is a size large. It comes in at 32.2 pounds, which is a pretty average, if not on the light side of average, for an entry-level mountain bike. There are a few huge standouts on this bike. If you haven't watched any of the other Talon videos, these new Talons basically are all 1x-drivetrains, so that brings it fully into modern mountain bike drivetrain territory. And geometries have been updated with things like a 67.5 head tube angle, 74.5 seat tube angle. So this is very much like what we were seeing just a couple of years ago on like a high quality bike at about 2,000 bucks or so. There are a few other details on this bike that I'll be looking at. We'll be taking a close look at spec and also some of those details that really make this bike stand out as something special. The first standout of this bike, I would say, is just the general frame shape and tubing shape. It really is a much sort of higher quality appearance bike than what you would expect from 750 bucks Canadian. Of big note is the fact that this top tube to sort of seat stay is in a nice line. We've got hydroform tubing, so we go from sort of thicker, flattened top going into a sort of a thinner profile here. So just the general frame shape, things like internal cable routing are a huge standout at this sort of a price point. As far as the things that may not be obvious to people, we now have a thru-axle on the frame. This is a big deal. Last year, the cheapest bike you would have seen with a thru-axle would have been, say, $1,500, maybe. Now, seeing this is bringing sort of the same sort of quality that we're seeing on all of the higher end bikes these days. This is a 142 millimeter thru-axle, not a boost thru-axle, but considering we're talking about a 750 or 620 USD bike, that is absolutely standout. And no, 142 millimeters is not just a gravel standard. This is where mountain bikes started, and they only switched to the boost 148 millimeter axle standard probably 7 or 8 years ago. So this is still relevant. You can get wheels quite easily and probably at better prices than boost wheels. So huge deal there. Also on the bikes, we have a really nice integrated chainstay protection. This is the best I've seen on any bike in this sort of price range. So something very good there. We have things like the threaded spot here to be able to put a pannier rack, threaded spot with a little plug here for pannier rack, a little hidden one down there for fenders, same with down here right behind the bottom bracket. So the features that you would need to make this sort of a good commuting bike that you could still maybe ride on some single track while you're commuting to work. The drivetrain on this, so all of the new Talons are 1x-drivetrains. In this Talon 4, we're looking at a 1x8 with a Microshift Acolyte. So this is basically their different naming on their drivetrains. Basically goes hand in hand with how many speeds. Acolyte is their clutch derailleur 1x specific 8-speed drivetrain. We've got a 12 to 46 range of teeth here. So a pretty broad range, though that is one of the things that you would get as you step up into the Talon 2 or the Talon 1, is that you're just going to get a little bit of a wider range here. Mostly on the low range, which is your sort of easy hill climbing gears, will improve as you step up in price on these bikes. But this one, with it starting at 12 teeth, in the next model we go to 11 teeth. So that is a little bit more of sort of a go as fast as possible sort of gearing. Rims on here are a 21 millimeter wide alloy rim. Nothing too special to note there, but one thing I just noticed as I was doing the sort of spec review before this video, these wheels on these Talons are actually a sealed bearing wheel. So this is a big step up. That's going to give you basically a smoother spinning and a longer lasting smooth spinning wheel than what we're typically seeing at these price points. So this is another thing that goes hand in hand with having things like that through axle. That is a huge jump in quality from previous versions of the Talon and anything else I know of at these sorts of price points on the market. One of the things that Giant has taken pride in is the fact that they're actually using a brand name Maxxis tire. In this case, it's a 29 by 2.2. The 29-inch wheels are available on small through extra large. There is no double extra large on this bike, and in a moment I'll probably discuss why that is very appropriate. But they do go down to an extra small, with extra small and small being available in 27.5-inch wheels. Stepping forward from that drivetrain there, we have a little bit more simple 1x specific crank on here, still made by Lucky Charms or some sort of no-name company. It's on a square taper bottom bracket. As I mentioned, whenever I see square taper on mountain bike, if you plan on jumping the bike or anything like that, at some point you will destroy these cranks. What will happen is the crank will basically start to sort of not sit on the spindle here very well, and in some cases on cheaper cranks you can have pedals that basically will damage the threads inside the cranks if you are jumping and being a rad gnarly dude. So just a thing to note, crank lengths are quite appropriate. We still have a narrow wide chainring on here, so that narrow wide combined with a clutched rear derailleur, that basically means that we're keeping our chain from just bouncing around wildly if you're riding through gnarly terrain, dude. We've got the usual things, bottle cage mounts on the seat tube, on the down tube. We have this nice new gusset. This is part of all the new Talons, which is what allows us to get this nice straightish line between top tube and seat stays. A 30.9 diameter seat post. That is going to tie in nicely with the fact that our internal cable routing is designed to allow for a dropper seat post. So this is a $749 bike that you could upgrade with about $300 worth of seat post and installs to add a dropper on here. With that being upgradable with our seat post, we also have a tapered head tube on this bike. So that means that you can actually upgrade this bike with a tapered steer tube, and down the road you could put on a thru-axle fork, and you could basically take this from being a $750 budget bike, and you could basically upgrade it a fair bit, and those key things like your head tube shape, your seat tube diameter, cranks would all be upgradable quite easily. So this is a very upgradable entry-level bike. As we step forward, one of the downgrades from the Talon 2 to the Talon 4 is the fact that we have gone from a 32 millimeter stanchioned Giant fork on the Talon 2. Now we're on a 30 millimeter stanchioned Suntour fork. That Giant fork, one of the nice things about it with being 32 millimeter stanchions is it's quite tough. As well as on the Talon 2, we have a through axle on the front end, whereas this is just using a standard quick release axle. So if you're big, you're burly, you want to do silly things without having to upgrade bits and pieces on your bike, I think the argument to step up from this 749 to 939 bucks, which I believe is what the Talon 2 is, I think that's going to be a worthwhile step up for you. If you're light, you're not huge, you're just going to ride the bike like a civil person, not like a radical Red Bull prospect, then I think you're probably going to be okay with this fork. We're still dealing with quite a basic coil sprung fork. It's got preload knobs, but these things, if you can even notice any difference, that's pretty impressive. This is where, when I mentioned that there is no double XL, I think this is very appropriate that they don't do a double XL, because this sort of fork size on a big bike with a big rider, I think would just become too spindly and flexy. So we have that 1x8 drivetrain. Their shifting is still with a sort of trigger shifter. These do operate with a push-pull. So this is like some of the Shimano shifters. What you don't get here is the option, like on a Shimano shifter, they will allow you to push. This is just a push-pull, but still super easy, super ergonomic. Looking at these brake levers, you will see the hint that this is a cable sticking out, not a brake line. So one of the steps we've taken from the Talon 2 into the 4 is that we're now looking at a mechanical disc brake. That basically means that we're yanking on a cable when we pull this, not pushing a column of fluid. So disc brakes are still a performance upgrade from having old school rim brakes, but what we get with a mechanical disc brake is just a little bit less power and a little bit more adjustment potentially needed down the road. We're looking at 160 millimeter rotors, front and rear, so still appropriate and what you would expect at this sort of price point. Yeah, so once again, this sort of ties in if you're planning on doing some more rigorous mountain biking. Stepping up to that Talon 2 at 939 bucks, you will get into a Tektro hydraulic disc brake, and that hydraulic brake can take Shimano brake pads. I, off the top of my head, couldn't even tell you what kind of brake pads fit in here, but you're going to get the benefit of disc brakes, that these are still going to give you decent power when they're wet, but it's only decent power, not much better power once we're talking about hydraulics. As we see here, there's your internal cable routing. We're on the wrong side of the lights. Just the details that we've got this brake mounted below the seat stay here. This will make it easy if you do want to mount any sort of a rack or fender. You don't have anything in the way back here. We also have included on the frame, there are built-in mounts for a kickstand there, if that's an important feature for you. So those are all of the specs on this bike. Oh, I didn't mention the handlebars on this bike are 780 millimeter wide Giant handlebars. The spec says that these are 690 millimeters wide. So on all of the Talons, Giant's website is wrong, and in actuality, you're getting proper width, real shaped mountain bike handlebars. So, hits and misses on this bike. I would say a huge hit is something like that thru-axle, that chainstay protection, those sealed bearings inside your hubs, the frame shape, upgradability to dropper seat post, and the fact that we have a tapered head tube, steer tube on here. Those are all huge hits. A big miss, if you've watched my videos, you know that I have a pet peeve for these Giant sole grips. They feel awful unless the goal of you going for a bike ride is to give yourself really good calluses in your hand. So a big miss there. The other things that I mentioned as far as things like brakes, a little bit of missed gearing, that I think is just sort of price appropriate. So just that's what you get when you go a little bit lower priced, is you miss out on a little bit of power, but this is still a very functional bike. And if your budget tells you that 749 bucks is what you're going to spend, this is about as well as you can spend $749 in a bike shop these days. I would be absolutely shocked to find out about anything else that a bike shop has that competes favorably with this. And I did just notice that I was a liar when I said this was a 30 mil stanchion. These are actually 28 millimeter stanchions. So a little bit spindly there. So heavy, if you're rad, if you're going to jump, if you're going to ride hard, step up to the Talon 2 and you will be glad you did within the next couple of years. As well as these grips, another upgrade that I would suggest, if you're actually going to go doing a little bit of mountain biking, these all plastic pedals, they're not terrible, but if you're actually riding off-road, you will probably find that your feet slip around on these a little bit too easily. The saddle on this bike, I'm a fan of these saddles as far as on a budget bike. I think that they're a decent shape, but saddles are always a big personal preference. So that is my rundown of this 2025 Giant Talon 4, the first price point we see in North America of the Giant Talon, and perhaps the best priced mid 700 Canadian or low 600 US mountain bike that you can find in a bike shop. Thanks for watching. If you like this info, give us a like, give us a subscribe. If you have questions or comments, I actually do try to respond to a lot of those, so please feel free, and thanks so much for watching. Cheers.